And we're live.
Greetings, everybody, and welcome to the 20-something-th, maybe 21st or 22nd episode of the ABT Time podcast. It is 3 o'clock in the afternoon in California, which means that in Melbourne, Australia, it is 8 a.m. And my co-host, Dr. Jen Martin, is joining us. How's it going down there, Jen?
Good morning, Randy. Oh, look, we're just having the most glorious spring weather in Melbourne, and sunshine just makes everything better. And I've got my warm cup of tea. I'm excited about today's conversation. Things are good, my friend.
And how's the lockdown going?
Oh, it's going. In Melbourne, we have a saying that the worst part of a 1 week lockdown is the first 4 months. So.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. All righty. Well, we've got wonderful episode today. And in fact, with these episodes, we've done a bunch that have been really funny and fun and entertaining and interesting. I would say today we've only really done one that I would necessarily call important, which was the one that we did on how to teach the ABT. That really is a resource that I think I find myself copying and sending out to a lot of people if you want to know how to go about actually teaching the ABT. We had 7 or 8 of us on that episode. But I think today's episode has the potential to also be important in a lot of ways. We're going to get into a lot of climate stuff. And our wonderful guest that we've got with us is Dr. John Sterman. I'm going to be bringing him in about 10 minutes, but I want to give a little bit of setup here to put everything into context. So I've known John for, maybe 12, 13 years, something like that. He is a professor at MIT. He is the J. Forrester Professor of Management. And by the way, John, once I'm done with all this 10-minute intro, you can come in and correct all the things. It seems to be becoming a tradition here for the guests to come in and correct all the mistakes I make in the intro. But he's with the School of Management there, the Sloan School of Management, MIT, and background in economics and policy and things like that. And, I got a feeling, and you can correct this if I'm wrong, but this is kind of one of his most important overall messages that he'll be here to talk to us about, that research shows that showing people research doesn't work. And that sort of points in the direction of what he has developed over the past decade or so, is this incredible climate interactive model it's very large, very important. We'll be getting into a lot of detail on it. Something he's run with the UN and with the members of Congress and at the COP conferences for climate and all sorts of things like that. So very large scale project. And there are 2 major dimensions that I connect with John on. So first off is climate communication. And here's a little bit of the history there, which is 2008, he had a paper in Science. I'm going to tell you about it in a little bit of detail in a minute or 2. I got in touch with him. That paper I am still such a huge fan of, and it's about climate communication. And then I got in touch with him, and then in 2010, for Earth Day, we did a screening of my movie Sizzle, a global warming comedy at MIT, and it was a big screening. We had a post-screening panel discussion. He was on the panel, and at the panel, he said, what you ought to do tomorrow if you're still around is come to my climate interactive simulation exercise. We're going to be doing it here at MIT for Earth Day. And I did. And there were probably 40 or 50 people that day took part in it. And it was powerful and tremendous. And I've been a huge fan of that and of John ever since then. So that's, again, what we're going to be getting into more depth. And that's the second part, is what he does. But, he kind of opened the door for me with his critique of communication, which I connected on. And then that led me into taking interest in what he's doing with this climate interactive simulation. So let me go into a little more detail on the first one in particular, climate communication. And this paper that he had, short paper in Science 2008, here's the background on it, which is that, actually, before I even get to that paper, just yesterday, we did the first session of the 17th round of the ABT framework course, 30 fisheries biologists in this particular round. And I dove in a little bit on this as part of the introduction this time. The idea, the large scale pattern of where we've gone as a society, which is that we've gotten worse at communication, not better. And I think that if you ask the average person, are we better at communication today than before? Everybody says, oh, of course we are. That just isn't true. And here's one milestone along the way. 1975, short paper published in the New England Journal of Medicine, titled Medical Obfuscation, Structure and Function. And the author of this was a postdoctoral fellow at the Salk Institute in La Jolla, California. And very simple little thing he did. He took one issue of the New England Journal of Medicine, read 3 papers in there, and then put together a list of the 10 most common characteristics in the writing style of these papers that resulted in this word obfuscation, which basically in simple terms means taking something that you probably could have understood except that I explained it to you in such a convoluted manner that you couldn't make any sense out of it. Obfuscation is just generating noise. And in the short discussion of this paper, this was one of the paragraphs said, contrary to popular belief, there's little historical precedent for bad writing. That's a very important statement, because there's a tendency for people to think that, oh, scientists have just always been bad at communication. And what he's saying here is, no, they haven't. And he goes on there and says, scientific prose is usually said to begin with Galileo. The Starry Messenger is a classic of vigorous exposition. Even as late as the 19th century, physicians stated their views with strength and conviction. Only in the 20th century has obfuscation become widely acceptable. Now, this is one of the things that upsets me about the science community, is that this is not a topic of discussion. There's no concession that communication is worse today than before. And, that's an element of shifting baselines. People don't even, that's exactly what this is now that I think about it. This is a baseline that people should be aware of. 100 years ago, communication was better. People's brains weren't as clogged up with the mess that we've got today. It's harder than ever before to communicate. So into that scenario comes this little paper that John did in 2008. And hopefully you all are aware of the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, and the fact that they produce these reports every, I think, 2 to 4 years, big fat reports of what's going on with the climate, and like maybe 3,000 or so delegates to these meetings that they have. And along with the report is this shorter little thing called the Summary for Policymakers, or SPM. And it's meant to be the plain language explanation of what's in this report. So John did this great experiment where he took 200 or so graduate students in science and math at MIT, had them read the previous year's SPM for that report, and then just simply regurgitate in simple, 2 or 3 sentences what basically is being said here for the science. When he read over their regurgitations, 84% of them got it wrong. And the bottom line of the whole thing is that, look, if graduate students at MIT can't make sense of this supposed statement for the general public, how in the world do you expect people with no technical background to understand it? I think a very important point. And you might have hoped that that would have been a milestone. The science world would have risen up and said, oh my God, we got to address this problem. But by 2015, a writer at Nature published another similar type thing, took the Fleisch Reading Ease Score Index and applied it to all of the SPMs for the IPCC reports going back to the early 90s, and found that the trend was straight downhill, that they were getting harder to read with time. And then last week, talking to John in preparation for this discussion today, I asked him, what's it like nowadays? And he said, it's just even worse. It's just a trend that keeps going in that direction. Final little footnote I like to touch back to 1975, that paper in the New England Journal of Medicine, the author of the paper was Michael Crichton. He went on to write Jurassic Park, a whole series of techno thrillers. Not only that, by 1994, he became the first person ever to have simultaneously #1 book, TV show, and movie, and just dominated Hollywood. He was a huge resource that the science world could have taken advantage of. But once he got outside the ivory tower, once he went to Hollywood, nobody would listen to him. And he spent 25 years spinning his wheels, trying to reach back to the science world. This is what happens at the ivory tower. Once you get outside of it, you get redefined. Why am I so clear about this? Because I've been through a similar sort of journey. That's what happens. And that's really a shame. And that really kind of leads into what we're going to be doing here, one little exercise in this discussion. So then the second piece here is the main focus of what John will be talking to us about, is his climate interactive simulation. And I'm not going to get into any detail on that. I'll let him kind of take it from the top on there. But the last little piece of introduction I want to give here is with our other guest, our supplementary guest that we're bringing along, which is, and bring on the fool. And so not yet, Patty, but a little bit of setup on this. I thought about doing this as an ambush, almost like dirty trick on John, to give him no forewarning, but then I thought it through and figured, you better have a little bit of warm up of what we're doing here. So for those of you who have taken the ABT framework course or read the narrative gym book, this is one of the core simple little diagrams that we use, which is everybody's always saying, know your audience. This is the simplest divide on your audience, which is the inner versus outer circle. And this is an important divide because this splits along narrative structure. Your inner circle doesn't need narrative structure. You can give them information. They've got the context. They know the consequences. They know why this is important. They're the most fun and easy to communicate with because they don't need any of that stuff. But everybody else is the outer circle. And the problem that people make is thinking that blue inner circle is larger than it really is. So everybody else is the outer circle, and they need this narrative structure, the ABT structure, setting things up, stating the problem and addressing it. But then there's another element that we've come across in the last 6 months, and that's the idea of one more character in this process, which is what we've identified as the official fool. And this is someone who basically knows narrative structure. They have enough common sense to know how to communicate. They know how to ask questions, but they're so far outside the outer circle. They're so distant from that inner circle that they just simply don't care what anybody thinks about them. And as a result, and they have no knowledge of the content. They don't know what the topic is. And as a result, these simple, obvious questions occur to them. And because they're outside the dynamic, they're willing to just ask the questions that nobody else is willing to ask. And it turns out that person can be very, very important. This is what goes on in our working circles exercise within the training. Over and over again, they report back. We had somebody in our working circle, we had 4 scientists, and then this guy from the business world showed up and asked the best questions, forced us to get this stuff clear because that person didn't have the background, the content in common with all of us. So this is what we mean by the Fool. And Dr. Patricia Limerick is one of the top historians of the American West in our country. She is a MacArthur Fellow, professor at the University of Colorado. She's also an official Fool. So back when she was doing her PhD at Yale University, she began to delve into studying the role of the Fool in societies. She eventually got herself designated the official Fool at Yale, and then at Harvard when she was a professor there, and eventually at University of Colorado, where she went and co-founded the Center for the American West there. And it's in our course in the past year that she has brought this concept of Fool in, and we found this actual structural definition for why this is actually an important role to have in a character and things that can come out of it. And as a result, we have invited her to join the conversation today. So on that note, Dr. Patricia the Fool Limerick and John Sturman, can you join us? I shall stop sharing. And good afternoon, John.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Randy. And Patricia, thanks for being here. I'm delighted.
And just as you said, we don't need to call you doctor. You can call
Absolutely not. Call me John.
You can call her Patty. And yeah, how about a little bit of background where you are right now with the simulation? And I'd say just get started. But the one challenge you're going to have is that Patty's going to kind of lead a lot of the discussion from this point, because we need you to explain to her what exactly is this simulation. She's going into official mode with the Fool hat. So take it away, John. Explain to Patty what the whole thing is.
Okay, great. So let's do it ABT style, right? So we know that climate change threatens our prosperity, our health, our security, and our lives, and that people need to know what the science says we can do about it. But as you quoted me earlier, research shows that showing people research doesn't work. Therefore, we created what I'm going to show you now, which is the En-ROADS Climate Policy Simulator, which is a way that everyone can learn for themselves about how the climate and economy works and what we can do to stave off the catastrophe that's looming. So how was that for ABT?
I mean, I don't know. Can a fool be that approving? Yes, of course, a fool can be extremely enthusiastic, but that should make you nervous. If the fool,
sucker me in, and then you're going to hit me hard. So, So what we've done is, and I'm serious. There's abundant research. I mean, I'm an academic. I want everything I do to be grounded in evidence. Stories are great, but the stories have to be based on something real. Otherwise, they can hurt people. So there's abundant evidence from risk communication, from the communication sciences in general, that you just can't tell people and expect that anything's going to change. And of course, this is known. The idea that you can fill in the gaps in people's knowledge is known as the deficit theory. And it's incredibly popular still today throughout the sciences, and I think in economics and social science too, even though it's been repeatedly shown to be just dead wrong. So the model that a lot of my dear colleagues follow is, well, we're going to do the fundamental basic research about how the climate works and what we can do. And then we're going to publish it in the peer-reviewed journals, and everybody's going to read it. And then, members of Congress and so forth are going to come and ask us to testify, and CEOs are going to come and ask for briefings. And then we're going to, show them a million PowerPoint slides. And then we've filled in the gaps in their knowledge, and now they're going to do the right thing. And that's just dead wrong. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work at all. So what does work? Well, listen, if you want to become a skilled pilot for a new aircraft, you're going to learn in a simulator. If you want to become an effective member of an operating room team for surgery, you're going to do that these days in a medical simulation. And I've been to several of them, and they're incredibly realistic. And it's the same thing for climate change. It's just as complex of a system as the human body. And there's no way to learn about it for yourself other than through experiment and experience. But of course, we can't do experiments on the climate. We only have the one planet. We can't run a controlled experiment. Let's see if we didn't burn fossil fuels, what would have happened to the climate? Oh gosh, look. And of course, if we wait for enough experience so that climate change is just so obvious that everybody gets it, then it's just going to be too late. And we're getting close to that point now. The events of this summer have really woken a lot of people up. But folks still don't have a clear idea of what to do. More and more people understand that this is an existential threat, that it's urgent that we cut emissions. You know, the mantra that comes out of the IPCC, if people have learned nothing from what the IPCC says in all of those dense, impenetrable reports that Randy referred to, it's this. In order to stay under the 2 degrees C, 3.6 Fahrenheit limit that was established in the Paris Agreement, which isn't safe, it's just less harmful than where we're going without action. In order to do that, global greenhouse gas emissions have to fall by about half by around 2030, less than a decade from now, and then go all the way to zero by mid-century, and probably even become negative, meaning we'd have to pull more CO2 out of the air than we're putting in. Cut emissions in half by 2030, all the way to zero by 2050. More and more people understand that, but very few people have any idea of what would work. What are the high leverage policies? What can matter in time? And which popular ideas couldn't possibly help us or help in time? So what we've done is we've built this interactive simulation model. I know not everybody's able to see this, but I'm going to share my screen. So it's called En-ROADS, the Energy Rapid Overview and Decision Support System. And what it does is lets you experiment with what is going on in the energy system and what policies you might want to try. We've designed it. So first I need to say that this has been developed as a partnership between my group at MIT, the System Dynamics group, and the MIT Sloan Sustainability Initiative, and a nonpartisan nonprofit called Climate Interactive, as Randy mentioned. Climate Interactive, nonpartisan, nonprofit think tank, founded and staffed by a number of my former students and good colleagues. And we work closely with them in developing all of this. And everybody out there can go to climateinteractive.org and learn all about our work. So under the hood here is a fairly large model of how the economy works, the energy system, and the climate. What you're seeing here, I know some people can't see it, is you've got on the left-hand graph, total global primary energy consumption. So total consumption of energy with coal in brown at the bottom, then oil in red, methane, natural gas in blue, all the renewables in green, bioenergy in pink, and nuclear power on top of that in blue. And you can see the impact of COVID there right around 2020. And that's projected to grow because of global population growth, economic growth, not as fast as the economy because there is technical progress going on that reduces how much energy we need to run our economy. But it's still, in this baseline scenario, generating a huge amount of greenhouse gas emissions, which is on the graph on the right.
Okay, now can I ask a question at this point?
Of course.
Patty, are you clear on everything?
Oh dear, oh goodness gracious. Yes, I am clear on one thing, which is different from saying everything, but I can totally understand and follow those bands of color.
Yep.
They're bright and they are rainbow, which happens to match my own clothing. This is
Yep.
very exciting. I ended up coming
Yep.
dressed for so
Exactly right. And from the dirty coal in brown to the green
And I said,
renewable energy
little
up
pink
there.
the bioenergy thing is very tiny, and renewable are getting thicker, but so I can do that. And I'm saying what everybody else can see. So it must be very obvious because I'm able to see it. So, but
Great.
then the rest of the slide breaks my heart. Because I think, oh, look, the Fool's doing really well. I can totally, global sources of primary energy. If I just look at that, I'm there. I am not as dumb as some people think I am. Look at me, I'm really doing very well. But if I stop looking just at the global sources of primary injury, this is a little bit of a Freudian slip. If I go from that primary energy thing into the rest of the slide, I despair. I don't, and I think maybe I didn't need to see all the little gray. I mean, we'll just say that the gray things are struggling because the color is so much more interesting. And in some ways,
this is really important feedback. And the most important thing I want to say is this isn't a slide. This is the live simulation. And all these bars, these sliders at the bottom are the things you can try to save our climate. And so.
Okay, all right, good. Okay, so yeah, can you at that point make it clear to the Fool here, who apparently thought that was a slide, can you show the foolishness of her perception in detail?
So what we do when we sit down with anyone, whether it's a senator, member of Congress, CEO, or middle school student, and all of these audiences have used the model.
But I have to ask the percentages, because we do have things about percentages going on here. When you say we sit down with senators and policymakers and so on, could you just tell me just a rough estimate, because I don't know how you would really quantify it, but what is the percentage of fools in the populations that you're speaking of, the senators, the corporate, the people?
So I'm not going to mention any names or political affiliations. We've done this with people from both political parties and leaders from across the spectrum around the world. I don't know how to judge what fraction of them are fools. And of course, what fraction are everyday fools, as you've defined it, and what fraction are official fools. Pretty clearly, there aren't as many official fools anywhere as we need. And there's far too many everyday fools.
Well,
I don't know, Mike.
Can I interject a little aside here? And sorry to bog things down, but just a couple of weeks ago, I came across somebody talking about someone who received the Pulitzer Prize for explanatory journalism, I think. And to that very point, my question was, who are the judges for something like that? Are they the fools that need to have things explained to them, or are they a bunch of highly educated people that listen to something? Oh, wow, that was a good explanation. How do you know? Why aren't the judges a bunch of truck drivers in Omaha, as opposed to academics judging themselves as being great explainers? Sorry, that's my little editorial side. So let's get back to but as you asked,
so it's a great point. And the purpose of this simulation is to help everybody. We're going to need everybody, right? Experts and policymakers cannot make the changes we need to bring emissions down. You see emissions over here, and they've got to fall by half by 2030 and then go to zero by mid-century or so in order to limit the warming to 2 degrees C or 3.6 Fahrenheit. There's no way to do that unless the public gets involved, because Congress people have to vote, and they're not going to vote against their interest in being reelected.
Okay, let me jump back in here, and sorry, we're butchering your whole presentation, but that's what we do here in this podcast. And let's see, Matt, are you able to hear my audio good enough? Because my internet went out for some reason, so I'm on my cell phone right now. But Matt, am I working okay?
Coming through good enough, Randy.
Okay, good enough. So I want to interject one little side note, which is on the subject of COVID communications. And last October, almost a year ago, a scientist, epidemiologist named Dr. Michael Osterholm was on Meet the Press, and he talked about the fact that we're not communicating well. And he said we're failing to communicate in a singular voice, we're failing to take advantage of story and storytelling. And as a result, I reached out to him. It's been a year now. He's still the only prominent figure from the science world who's saying that we're not communicating well. And that's what drew me to him. That's what drew me to you. And so anything I'm pushing back on you, about communications, you have a world of respect for me, because you're one of the few people that pointed that out. Look, you did an emperor has no clothes thing with that 2008 article in Science, in my opinion. So I think that's a little bit of what we're pushing on right now in terms of, you say we need to reach the public. How many experiences do you have with this model of people who are not truck drivers, but really zero technical background coming up to you and
Quite
saying
a
this
lot.
was eye-opening? Yeah.
Quite a lot.
And
And of course, it isn't just me, it's everybody on our team and the now more than 300, what we call En-ROADS climate ambassadors who experienced the model, got motivated to go through the training that we provide, which is all free, and then take it out into their communities all over the world. I mean, we're talking about people going to African villages, boardrooms for Fortune 500 companies at every level. And we literally run this with middle school students, and not just in the elite schools, in the Boston suburbs, but in West Virginia, in the South, all over. And
okay. And so as a means of introducing the overall exercise, let me tell my one experience there in 2010, and then you take it from there and modify how it's grown since then. But what happened to me in 2010, I joined your thing with 40 or 50 people that day. Everyone in the room was assigned a country. I got assigned Indonesia. Incredibly, John still remembers that I was in Indonesia. Then you got put with a bunch of other countries in that region, and you were given this assignment to make concessions to reduce carbon emissions so that we can keep the planet from warming up to this horrible level, which was, what did we think it was 5 point something you had back then, was if we do nothing different by 2100, we're going to be way up there at 5.0. We've got to pull things back in carbon emissions so that we don't go past two degrees increase. So everybody went and agonized for a couple hours about what you were willing to give on concessions. Then we went up and reported to you here's our three little numbers of our concessions. You plugged it in the model. And the reason this is so powerful for me comes straight out of our storytelling stuff, which is what this ABT Time podcast is about. Because stories, the power of stories rests in specificity and specifically in a singular moment. Great movies all come down to that one moment where it all comes together. And that's what you did with that simulation that day, was that everybody finally quieted down. And then we sat there and watched as you ran the model, and we waited for that one number to come back. And everybody hoped that we had brought it from 5.6 or whatever it was all the way down to 2 with our concessions. And when you ran it, the thing spit out, it went from 5.6 to like 5.2, and that was it. And everybody was like, oh my God, you kidding? With all the concessions we made, that's all the impact that we've done. And then you turned to the crowd and you said, everybody get back to work. You got to dig much deeper if you're going to have an impact on this curve. And then we did it later and it improved a little bit. So was that pretty much reflective of the simple exercise back then?
Yeah, so that's what we call the world climate role play. And people take the roles of different world leaders and they negotiate just like people do at the COPs, the Conference of the Parties, the big global climate summits, the next one coming up in November in Glasgow, Scotland. And we've been at all of them since Copenhagen in 2009. And I was at that one and in Paris and the year after and the year after that. And our team has been there at all of them using the model in various ways with all kinds of audiences. But, Randy, instead of telling people about it, let's do it. So, when we sit down with a CEO or a senator or, a class of high school students, what we do is we say, listen, you've got to cut emissions dramatically here. What do you think we ought to do? I never sit down with a senator and say, so this is what we need to do about climate change. And my dean loves to tell the following joke. He's, every time I go into his office, he says, every time a faculty member comes into my office, what they start out is they say, good afternoon, Dean. Let me tell you how you can help me today. And that's what the life of a congressperson or senator is like. People are asking them for something, lobbying for this or that. We never do that. We sit down, we say, what do you want to try to see if we can solve this problem? It's totally up to you. And people give whatever answer they want. So what do you want to try? And why don't we, Patricia, Patty, why don't you get
recording in progress.
Oh,
Randy, mute your phone. Okay, there you go.
Randy's on twice. No.
Hang on.
Right.
Sorry, I was afraid of this.
It's so bad the way space aliens just keep.
All right. So we'll keep Randy out of this for a minute till he figures out the tech.
That's muted.
And so, Patty, what you can do, all these bars on the bottom are things you can do, actions you can take. You could limit coal. You could limit oil or natural gas. You could put a price on carbon. You could subsidize renewables or nuclear. In the middle, you could work on energy efficiency, or you could electrify transportation or buildings. and industry. And over here, you could cut back on deforestation. You could plant 1 trillion trees if you wanted to do that. You could cut the methane and the nitrous oxide, the other greenhouse gases besides carbon dioxide. What do you want to do?
I see. Okay, so that was very helpful. And now I am going to put this on because I have some very silly things to say, which is that.
But I'm not going to let you off the hook. First, pick
but
something.
I just have a quick remark here, which is about the color gray, which is a very disheartening color. And it is very bad there because the greenhouse gas net emissions, that's looking very terrible. And the gray thing so overshadows any other color there. And so that, and then a colorful one on global sources of primary energy, that is more colorful, but both of them are just as they are, and they are not, they seem very fatalistic to me. They seem like.
Well, so you have to decide what to try. By the way, the gray.
But can you think about this? Because I just have a little moment here. I am a huge fan of improvisational theater, and because these colors are so striking, I would say that rather than this graph, which seems to say, you're screwed, fool, you're screwed, everybody's screwed, so don't take it personally. Plus, I don't know that it's brilliant to have the places where we're going to take action, to have them the color gray, which we know to be the color of here comes disaster in the greenhouse gas net emissions thing. I think the color gray is just like, okay, fasten your seatbelts and head to despair. So it is weird to me that the color gray is the governing.
So in the graph.
I have one more thing here, which is that I would say you have the world's finest opportunity to get some improvisational theater, maybe in combination with a dance group, rather than looking at this miserably inert, this is what we are stuck with, this is what we live with, these are the progressions, here are the bands and the colors that we can expect. That is so waiting to be a really, really fun performance. That is,
So,
if you
that's what happens in the negotiation, right? But it's not static, but I'm not going to pull any levers. You have to tell me what you would like to try to solve the problem, not letting you off the hook here.
No, I just need to finish this ridiculous idea, and I did put the hat on for it. I think those colors would be so great if you had actors, dancers, and leotards, and they performed the part of these different sources of a primary.
What a fool.
That's a great idea. It's pretty labor intensive, and I don't have any of those talents. Nobody wants to hear me sing or watch me dance. That's for sure. So
I was not suggesting I should do that, but they're very talented people. That would be a spectacular enactment or role play with different scenarios, ones that would suggest possibility in a much more dynamic way than these faded, here we go, this is in place, the gray dominates. When the gray character came, well, that's moving to the other.
What you've got to do is you've got that gray in the graph, that biggest band, that's the carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuels, from burning coal, oil, and gas. And it's gray because exactly the emotional tone you're describing. You've got to get that down to zero by mid-century. So how are you going to do it? What do you want to try?
Why do I want to choose anything that's gray? If my point is to defeat gray, all of my choices are.
Wait a second though. Let's stop right there and make sure that the fool understands what you just said. Is that all clear to you, Dr. Fool?
Sure, that I could move.
What is your goal with this simulation, Ms. Fool?
What is the one thing we could do that you think would have the biggest impact on saving our climate?
And that's to. I would move my little, if I had access to it, but I would move my little thing there on the spectrum, and I would take maybe, because there might be fewer fights over that, I might take energy efficiency in buildings and industry, and I would be choosing that not because I thought it had the greatest impact, but because I thought I would play on lead buildings. People are already doing that.
So now let's try it and see what happens. So I'm going to pull the lever, and as I pull the lever, it's not static and inert anymore. Look what's happening, right? More energy efficiency lowers the warming because we're lowering how much energy we use overall, and that lowers the fossil. So as I move that lever towards more aggressive deployment of energy efficiency, everything gets a whole lot better. So I'll pull it about halfway. And what that means in the real world is we're going to need to provide subsidies for people to invest in energy efficiency in their homes and for businesses to do the same. commercial buildings and industrial facilities. We're going to need access to low-cost capital and subsidies, especially for the poor and the disadvantaged, because they can't afford to do it now, even though they live in the worst, least efficient housing now. And it matters big time. It's a huge impact. You've dramatically lowered the warming. We went down from 6.5 Fahrenheit to 5.9. That's a big deal. And so in that fashion, this is how the model works. You get immediate feedback on the likely effect of your action. So it helped a lot, but we have a long way to go. What else do you want to try?
Well, what I want to acknowledge is that I did nothing on the proportions of sources of free energy.
You still have
how could I?
a lot of coal, oil, gas, and some renewables.
So there might be a moment where I would think, well, that's nice that I got a little bit less gray, but I certainly had no impact on these, what's the more important determinant of what goes into the air.
How do you want to shift the energy system so it's more renewable and less coal, oil, and gas?
Now I'm going to speak for individual human beings worldwide, if I might, which is a very ambitious goal. I'm not going to do that. I actually think of my own energy efficiency, and I think that is such a microscopic thing here. So the one domain where I might have some impact is so piteously micro that it's hard to know why I would bother. And I wonder if there isn't, and I know that this will happen to people when they think, well, I could change my behavior, but that's not going to mean a darn thing. So I want to know how we are going to deal with a possible demoralization. Oops. So yeah.
So you're raising a fantastic point here. When you said increase energy efficiency, part of that might be personal behavior, right? You might decide, hey, I'm going to spend the money to insulate my house and put in better windows and plug up all the leaks. And people should do that. But that's not the only thing it represents. It represents policies that in the US, our government is debating right now as they mark up the reconciliation bill. How much of a subsidy and tax credit should we provide for individuals and businesses with what kind of income thresholds so that you'd have an economic incentive to do this? So we give you a bigger tax credit, lots of people are going to do it. We provide low-cost capital for the poor so that they can finance this without paying usurious interest rates. That's a policy. That's not counting on the goodwill of people to change their personal behavior when all the pressures are telling them, hey, be wasteful because energy is too cheap. So, that's a really important point here. So,
and I just want to say, though, that I'm trying to be attentive to I think what this, I'll call it a game, though I understand it's a simulation, but
game is fine.
I need a little bit of a panic button option. I should have a panic button where I get to say, uh-oh, unintended, dispirited fatalism, sudden onset, help me. Because when I think about when I think about how really not even worth discussing is my neighborhood's response to this energy efficiency, my little house. So I think there is a scale opportunity for despair here.
So this is so important because despair is where most people are starting right now, especially after this terrible summer, hottest on record, horrible extreme weather, wildfires all over the world. Siberia is burning. It rained on the highest point of Greenland for the first time in the record this past summer. And the melt in one day, I believe, was enough to cover all of Florida 2 inches deep. So people are already starting in despair. I can't tell you how many serious business executives and political leaders privately, and a lot in public, start out telling me, it's too late. We're screwed. We ought to just focus on adaptation. Things are going to get worse. And young people do too. They feel that their future's been stolen. And what happens when people do this is they actually come out the other side, many, maybe I think most, based on our research, with more hope. But You've got to put a little more skin in the game here, though, Madam Fool. So what else do you want to try?
I got the despair over my own tiny inability to do anything that would scale up. Then you got me to the second round of despair, because then you said that these policies were being debated, and that actually, then I went further into despair, because I thought, oh yeah, right, as if that Congress is going to do it, huh? That's really, and as if I'm going to persuade that Congress. So I think you should consider, you and Climate Interactive, a little panic button, really, a little, uh-oh, I know you were trying to save me from despair, but uh-oh, I'm going deeper. Help me, lifeline, throw out a
The
lifeline.
thing is, I can't push the panic button and then have all the levers move on their own to something, because then you wouldn't be choosing, you wouldn't be learning. So
To help me, to say, stay in there, you silly thing. Do you think it's going to get better if you just go further in?
Well, Patty, we need you to make some choices here. What would you like to move for these sliders?
My choices. Well, okay, so it does look like there's a pretty sizable thing going on with the diminishing of coal and coal mining and the shutting of coal plants. So I guess I would
Right.
take the coal.
great. So let's get the coal out of the system. And there's a couple ways to do that. One would be policies and actions that would stop the construction of all new coal power plants and other infrastructure. And you choose the year. 2025 doesn't seem implausible here. And look at that graph there. Coal peaks and falls. And now that got us down to 3 degrees C. That's a big deal. Getting the coal out of the system really helps.
Wait, hang on, John. Where can you show us where are you seeing the 3 degrees C?
Right over here on the right in big blue letters, 3 degrees C. And remember where we started is 3.
Hang on, the right. I'm not seeing that on my graph.
I'm seeing it, Randy. Everyone else is.
Oh,
Yeah.
shucks. Am I not getting the whole width of the screen?
But whatever it is.
Apparently, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I guess I
There
would
you go.
also,
So, and let's take a look.
Okay.
There's the temperature graph. This is where we were headed before, and the blue line is what you've been able to do. And that's a big improvement. Now, not enough and not in time, but getting the coal, you got to keep the fossil carbon in the ground. And coal being the worst of the fossil fuels, you got to keep the coal in the ground. It's cheap and abundant, but we can't burn any more of it. And you've done a great job of doing that. And we could even get it out even faster. We could pay coal plants to shut down, accelerate early retirement. You could regulate them. There's a lot of ways to do this. And now coal is really on the way out. And that's helping a lot. We could do more, but it doesn't go away immediately because a lot of countries in the world are heavily dependent on it. And it's a powerful lobby in those nations. But that helped a lot. So
well, can I just tell you that helped a lot as well, because I think I got off on the wrong foot with energy efficiency, because that is so much about cumulative individual choice and members of Congress and so on. And I think by empowering me just to quit the new construction, which as a power I do not have, but I didn't particularly worry about not having that power because you just let me do it. So I can see that is your anti-despair.
That's part of it for sure. And let me tell you, I don't think it's just about personal action. On the other hand, I'm coming to you now from my home, and it's about a 95-year-old typical New England colonial revival stick-built, wooden house. And when we moved in here, when my family and I moved here in 1991, it was horribly inefficient. We did a bunch of stuff over the years to improve it, but 6.5 years ago, we did what's called a deep energy retrofit. The whole place was falling down, so we had to do a renovation. And instead of just doing a renovation, we did the deep energy retrofit. And what that means is we spent a little more money and a little more time to make it super efficient. So there's a lot of insulation in the walls, including we put some on the outside of the walls. We have really high performance windows here. We tightened the building envelope so it doesn't leak all the time. You pay to heat all this air in the winter and then it just leaks out. We put high efficiency appliances everywhere. The most important things we did were we completely eliminated the natural gas, which was the heating and hot water, and replaced that with heat pumps, air source heat pumps. The house is now 100% run by electricity, and we put solar on the roof. And so now we've got 6 full years of experience with this. And what I can tell you is we have made over that time period about half, 50% more energy than we use. So my carbon footprint in my home is now negative. We are a power plant, and we get paid for all the excess energy we put into the electric grid, because Massachusetts and all the New England and Mid-Atlantic states have climate policies. So it isn't just dependent on Washington. They have climate policies, and that makes it very attractive to do what I did here. And there's ancillary benefits. The house is more comfortable. It's bigger inside without an addition, because we got rid of all that natural gas and the pipes and the radiators. The heat pumps don't take up hardly any room. They're outside. There's no ducts, etc. It's healthier for us. It's just better, and it's cost effective. We've been making money on this, and there's a huge opportunity to do this. So don't belittle energy efficiency here. It's actually the fastest, safest, cheapest thing we can do to help with the climate crisis. It's still not a silver bullet. It doesn't solve the whole problem. Getting rid of the coal helped a lot. Still got 1 whole degree to go. What else do you want to try here?
I'm very curious to know what will happen with this. I won't say that this is the cause that I would care to put my own name. Well, I would do it. I guess I would do it. Okay, I would like to really go all the way with nuclear.
Okay, so let's try it. So nuclear is the blue band at the top, and it matches the historical behavior. Let's really crank up nuclear. And you can see the blue band got a lot bigger. In fact, if you look at that graph, it shows nuclear capacity just explodes starting basically in the next couple of years, and grows by a factor of 5 by about 2050. That's huge.
Right. I will have to move away from Boulder, Colorado, though, because
so I'm staying agnostic here, right? It's your choice.
Yes.
But what did it do for the climate? We were at 3 degrees, and now you're at 2.9. So there's been this massive expansion at great cost in nuclear capacity, and all the safety and waste disposal and proliferation risk and terrorist risk and all the issues that come with nuclear. Whether you think they're real or not, it's controversial still. And it only bought you 1/10 of a degree. It doesn't do that much. And then the question is why? And so to get a handle on that, look at the graph here. You've got a lot more nuclear. I'm going to roll it back. Look at the green band. That's your wind and solar and hydro and geothermal. Those are your renewables, right? They produce no greenhouse gases after deployment. So what happens to the green band when we go all in on nuclear?
Oh, I didn't want that. So, John, because
it got a lot smaller.
I'm going to finish the sentence, because I will be driven out of Boulder, Colorado, if I am known to be the person who said go all the way with nuclear. And since it turned out to be not a very productive idea, I would like to reverse that before my neighbors come force me out.
Yeah, and I mean, I get you. I've spent a little time in Boulder, and I very quickly learned I am definitely not cool enough to live there.
Right, so I so need to get whatever I had in the way of reputation has to come back really fast. So I'm reversing on the nuclear, and I guess I'm going to do much better, although people are not thinking through the rare earth minerals and so on, but I'm going to go up on renewables. I would like to go up on.
Okay. So huge expansion in the renewables and another 1/10 of a degree. So that's helpful, and it'll be a lot, you'll be invited to a lot more parties in Boulder now.
Start notice they're going to get, I'll get people with concerned about landscape disruption. I'll get people who are concerned with rare earth mining. I'm not going to, maybe they won't drive me out as much as they would have for the nuclear, but I'm going to be at risk here because
Sure.
I've put some burdens.
By the way, that's one of the great things about energy efficiency. You don't have to build a power plant anywhere, whether it's a nuclear plant or a solar farm.
Let me jump in here. Matt, you want to read 1 or 2 of those questions there about the categories?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we got a question from Mr. DYT436 on YouTube. The categories are a bit abstract. Could some reflect actions individuals can take, such as ride your bike to work instead of the car, instead of
Absolutely.
transport?
That's a great question. So we didn't touch energy efficiency in transportation yet. So that includes things like, well, what if we had more efficient automobiles through stronger CAFE standards? But it also includes people getting rid of their car and riding their bike. I've been a bicycle commuter my whole career, and rain or sunshine, winter, summer, doesn't matter, hurricanes, snow, doesn't matter. And so that is included there. And it's not just ride a bike, it's also communities deciding, let's put sidewalks and bike lanes in so it's safe for kids and everybody else to walk and ride to school or work or the supermarket instead of having to drive, etc. And that helps. That a little tiny bit of energy efficiency in transportation got you another 1/10 of a degree, and more gets you more. So that's really helpful. But I think there's a really important point here. People, so you, Patty, and also our questioner out there are focusing on what we can do personally. And it's incredibly important. And I've done that here in my house, and I bicycle and I compost and so on. There's a lot of things that I try to do personally. So I think it's important. You got to walk your talk here. But it's not going to be enough. If you want to take personal action, then one of the things you need to do, and this is a yes and, not an either or, is you also got to get politically active. You've got to start lobbying your companies, your institutions, and your government officials to enact the policies that can get us where we need to go. So that's personal action as well.
I think I've been incentivized, and I may be making choices that are not what I would actually, well, okay, so I did really well when I dropped coal. So I guess I would like to cut back on oil, but I'm also very curious. My first thing I want to ask is cut population, because I don't myself think that's going to make much difference, but I would like to know if it will.
So here we're using the UN's main projection for population. You see the regions here, the US, the EU, India, China, the other developing nations, et cetera. And, we can lower that, and you see it's falling. The question is, well, there's two questions. One is, does it do any good for the climate problem? And let's look at total population here. So there's your base case. UN says not quite 11 billion people by 2100. If we cut that back, it doesn't really start to have a big impact until the latter part of the century. And that's just because of the inertia in the age structure of the population around the world. But it also doesn't do much for the climate. And then the second question is, how would you do it? And there are answers to that. And those answers are empowering women and girls around the world, education, especially for young girls, but for everybody. It's access to healthcare, not just pre and postnatal care, but general healthcare, so people are healthier and life expectancy is increased. And those are the things that are proven to work to reduce family size, reduce the onset of the childbearing years for women. And we know how to do that. And those are wonderful, important things to do. They are one of the categories of the Sustainable Development Goals that the UN has been promoting. But it doesn't.
Let me ask a question here. I mean,
the climate problem.
So the question is, what's the magic bullet? What's the one simple thing that we can do right now that's just going to fix this overnight?
I was incentivized.
Not for me to say, Randy. You all have to figure it out yourself. You're really trying to trick me into becoming the expert instead of the guide on the side, right?
Let me try to drop oil, because I got so incentivized by having my only really significant success when I cut back on.
Okay, so go for it, Fool. Give him some more things to experiment with.
Great. So the most effective way to cut oil and all the other fossils is to put a price on carbon pollution. And so we can do that right here. So I'll add a carbon price. Now we're at 2.8, and a moderate carbon price, which is, I'll round it off to $60 a ton, which is 53 cents a gallon on gasoline, which would leave gasoline in the United States way below European levels. That gets us all the way down to 2.6. Now, there's a really important issue here. What do you do with the revenue? Well, what you do is you give it back to everybody in the country so that it doesn't hurt the poor, right? So affluent people like us, we should pay more, and we can afford to. But low-income people, if you tax gasoline and other fossil fuels, it's going to hurt them. So the way you solve that is to give everybody a carbon dividend. You give them a check every quarter, every month, and it's their share of all the revenue that comes from this. And now, because the poor don't use anywhere near as much energy as the rich, those people actually come out better, and the rich pay more, like they should. And that turns the carbon pricing policy from regressive into progressive. And they're in fact debating this in Washington this week. Now, whether it's going to happen, nobody can say, but there's some support for that on both sides of the aisle.
Okay, let me ask a question to the Fool then. Ms. Fool, don't you like trees?
Oh, I do. And I also recognize, well, I do hang out with foresters, and I am living in a region where a lot of carbon goes in from forest fires from overly dense. Yep. So I don't have it's so clear what forest management could do for this, because we have now a bunch of overly dense biomass on forest lands.
Right.
And that confuses me, because I do understand that a tree, a thriving forest, not a troubled, sick forest, but would actually absorb CO2. I'm not the stupidest of fools here. Look at this. Too much time with foresters. Actually.
No, this is great. So let's go over here to the land use sector on the right, and I'm going to reduce deforestation, which is a huge problem, not just in the Amazon and Indonesia, but also in the boreal forest, the Canadian and Siberian forests. And that helped a lot. And now let's plant a lot of those healthy trees that you're talking about, okay? And everybody's familiar with this. I think it's been popularized in the last couple of years as the Trillion Tree Campaign. And people are out there saying, if we just plant 1 trillion trees around the world, climate problem solved. It's been touted as a magic bullet. Well, let's do it. We're at 2.5. Let's plant 1 trillion trees. Boom, 1/10 of a degree. Now, planting trees in many places is a wonderful thing to do, especially in our cities where especially the poor and communities of color suffer from the urban heat island effect. It's horrible. So planting trees in those places and in other places around the world is a wonderful thing to do. It restores habitat, it improves water availability, it reduces erosion, it preserves biodiversity. It doesn't solve the climate problem, even though you can see now we have negative land use emissions from about 2047 here on.
What do those people say to you when you show them this? Do they hate you?
Well, I hope they don't hate me, but they ask, well, why doesn't it have more impact? You've obviously done something wrong. Well,
right.
It doesn't have more, when you plant a tree. So Pakistan just planted, I think, 1 billion trees, and but how big were those saplings? They're this big. The amount of carbon in there is a few grams. Next year, a few more grams. The year after, a few more grams. It takes decades for those trees to grow large enough to be able to pull a lot of carbon out of the air every year. And that's what's happening here. It does eventually become a huge carbon sink, meaning sucks a lot of CO2 out of the air. That's a great thing, but it doesn't kick in until the last few decades of the century. By then, it's too late, because you're still burning a lot of fossil fuels, especially oil.
On a similar note, whatever happened to 20 years ago, the iron limitation ideas out in the ocean, and were those
same idea? Yeah, iron fertilization.
Right.
It doesn't really work. I mean, it works in the sense that, so the iron is a limiting nutrient in a lot of the ocean. You put iron or rust, iron oxides into the water and you get a phytoplankton bloom. This definitely happens. But see, people are only thinking about the beginning of the process. Then the question is, well, what happens to the carbon in those phytoplankton? And what happens is most of it goes back into the air because the plankton die or are eaten, and the critters that
let me ask you a couple.
Goes back into the air.
Yeah, let's take a break for a moment here. Let me ask you a few broad, simple, overarching questions detached from this, but your personal experiences with the modeling going out there. You've got this model which is based on lots of knowledge and is in some ways a truth teller, like you're saying there with the trees thing. And you listen to all these people jumping around saying just plant trees everywhere, and you're looking at your model says, sorry, that's not going to do much.
No silver bullet, right?
Yeah, well, okay. So how often do you have that experience in today's world, looking around all these people running around touting their solution to the climate process? Do you have that experience a lot where you see a lot of people running around with their one thing, and then you're looking at your model saying, no, it's really not going to be that important?
All the time. And, in some sense, and I hate to presume, so Patty, tell me I'm just totally wet here, but, I'm trying to be the fool in a sense who, when somebody says, this is what we need to do, I don't say, no, that's not going to work. I say, let's try it. Nuncle, let's try it and see what happens. And then they try it. And then they don't like what they see, and then they challenge the assumptions. Well, we can change all the assumptions. So we don't have time really to do this, but on the trees, you can change all the assumptions about how long does it take trees to reach maturity, and how much land does it take for that to happen, and how much carbon.
That's why I'm asking you some of these broad, simple questions about the experience.
So, but notice the arc of the conversation. It's not trees are going to solve the problem. No, they won't. Here's my paper that says trees will solve the problem. Well, here's my paper that says they won't. That doesn't work, right? Instead, let's try the trees. Well, it didn't work. How come? Oh, well, you must have been assuming something that I don't agree with. Well, let's put in what you like. Still doesn't work, etc. And pretty soon, most people. So the best thing that can happen when I run a model like this is at the end of the session, somebody says, here's what we need to do to solve the problem, but it's all obvious. I didn't need your model, right? That's a great outcome because now they've taken it internalized, and they're not relying on what could become, an oracle, a black box that the model says. Models never say, people say.
Yeah. Hey, Rod, are you still with us? You want to join in? You got a question or two?
And ask the question that I think is the question we have to ask now. Why should we trust your algorithms, buddy? Huh? I mean, we're such a suspicion and distrust.
So absolutely right. And you should absolutely not trust it because I'm a professor at MIT, or because I can tell you what the IPCC says. You should trust it if you're serious about that and not using it as just a rhetorical device to get out of town. The way you trust it is, we have published the entire model. It's 100% open box, transparent, fully documented for free. And everything here you can have and you can try yourself. So nothing.
So everybody listening right now could be playing this game themselves on their own.
Absolutely.
Laptop.
Go to n-roads, en-roads.org, and you can start playing with it yourself and change the assumptions, and you can see the documentation. You go to the website, you can see every equation if you want to.
Great. Okay, Rod, did you have a question?
Quick comment and question?
Yeah.
Quick comment is very interesting to watch this conversation between two geniuses and two fools with a fool and a genius mediating. Very interesting to watch on comms perspective, someone coming very much from the big picture and someone diving in immediately and saying, but how does that affect me from the small picture?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's critical to somehow bridge here, because I can imagine exactly that. People who are into models and simulations, which I am, are sitting there going, this is fantastic. People who find this intimidating and strange and unapproachable won't. But that leads to my question is, if you haven't already done this, you've probably thought of it, you're at MIT. Can you turn this into an actual game with this back end behind it? But actually, I'm an addict for Sim City and games like this. And I'm always fascinated. But what you get then is interesting, interactive, immersive visual feedback. You see pictures of planets, you see buildings growing and shrinking. This to me would be the back end of one of the most amazing and fascinating games in the world.
Yeah.
Could that go there? Have you thought about that? Is it too expensive? Am I insane?
So it's a great idea, and we have thought about it, and lots of people suggest it. It's very expensive to compete with, Call of Duty 5 or whatever it is.
Right.
They spend millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to produce those things. If anybody wants to help with this, I'd be delighted to talk to them. But
Well, okay, let me interject one thing on that. This is the same old thing I talked about in my movie Flock of Dodos 15 years ago, which is you're constrained by the truth. That handicaps you against all those competitors, Call of Duty or whatever, Sim City or who knows what. They don't have to be dealing with the truth. You are handicapped by the truth, which means you've got to have this extra effort in your whole project to keep things within the bounds of reality as opposed to telling a good story.
So we have to do both, right? And I mean, Rod, your comment is so on point here, right? Lots of people have been building computer simulation models since computers. And most of them have done precisely nothing. They've had no real world impact. On the other hand, people have been building games and they're incredibly sophisticated now. And some of them are a heck of a lot of fun. But, as wonderful as SimCity is, I really don't want to design a better LA based on SimCity. And so you have to have two things. You have to have, so there's two failure modes, right? If you've got the world's best model, but a lousy user experience, you've wasted everybody's time and nothing will happen. But the other failure mode is you have the world's most exciting, immersive interface, but the model doesn't have integrity. Now, that's really dangerous because you've created an environment where people can learn harmful, wrong lessons far more effectively than ever before. So you have to have both. And I mean, I would love to make it a game. So the way we do it is the game part is what happens in the interpersonal negotiation that Randy described. So I'll give you an example. We do this with executives all the time. And so some of them are going to represent the rich countries and the big industries and the oil companies, and others are going to represent the poor countries and the environmental groups who don't have any money. And when we can do this live, and I did it live at MIT in August with our executive MBAs, and these are serious people, they're mid-career, high potential future leaders, very serious, they're paying a lot of money to be in our program and they don't want to waste their time. So we assign them to these delegations. And the first thing I do is, okay, you people, you're the environmental groups, you're Greta Thunberg, and you folks, you're the sub-Saharan Africa countries and the other poor countries around the world. And I say poor because, let's not mince any words here, right? We're not just going to call them emerging or less developed. They're poor countries with billions of people who don't have reliable water or electricity or healthcare or transportation or anything. And I say, okay, now come sit on the floor. And they have to sit on the floor and they actually get into it. And meanwhile, the rich countries and the rich industries, their tables are laden high with beautiful snacks. The poor people have nothing. And all of a sudden, there's a real grievance in the room between those who are deprived and those who have a lot. And that motivates a serious negotiation. And when they get started, and Randy, I think this was your experience, you hear people standing up and saying, you Western countries, you created the climate crisis. You need to cut your emissions. We need to burn fossil fuel in order to grow our economy. And of course, you can't do that. Everybody has to cut. But you can't tell them that. They have to learn it for themselves. So
that's very cool.
I did this, so very quick story. I did this once with a group of government, provincial leaders and business leaders from China. It was at MIT, it was with simultaneous interpretation. And we got to the point in the simulation where that had happened. So everybody is from China, but they're all playing these different roles. And so their proposals were, the US has to cut, and Europe has to cut, and Australia and Canada and New Zealand and so on, Russia, they have to cut. We get to burn to grow our economy. And when you do that in the simulation, you can show them that sea level rise is still so bad and extreme weather is still so bad, et cetera, that Shanghai is going to disappear. Shenzhen is going to disappear. And I showed them that. And then I said, so what does that mean? And there was dead silence for a long time, like 10 seconds. That's a long time. And I said, so what does it mean? And there was more silence. And finally, somebody said something. And what I heard in my earpiece was, it means we have to leave the past in the past. That was the critical moment. They had discovered for themselves that this fight over historical responsibility doesn't matter. Everybody's got to cut, including the developing countries, including China, or else they themselves are going to suffer greatly. And all of a sudden, it broke open. Now it wasn't a negotiation about if you win, I must be losing. It wasn't zero sum anymore. Now they realized they had to view it from what negotiation people call the integrative frame, meaning we have to create shared value together. We're all in the same boat together. If I had told them that, nothing would have happened. They all would have folded their arms and said politely, BS. But they discovered it for themselves. And it's that live human real negotiation experience with real grievances. Why am I sitting on the effing floor when they have chairs and delicious food? I'm going to go steal their chairs, which happens. That's where the gaming comes in.
So I have 2 or 3 things I would like to say. One of them is that the oracle at Delphi in Greek tales seems to be so much inspiration for you, because that's what you're doing. People are going to the oracle, and the oracle at Delphi, the priestesses apparently made very little, they did not just tell you what to do. They spoke in sometimes quite unintelligible ways, or ways that were difficult to interpret and so on. And I just think you might really enjoy feeling common spirit over 2,500 years with the oracles that the priestesses and the oracles at Delphi, because it is really kind of that same thing of, can you tell us the future? And it's usually said like in aphorisms, like the thing that you just said.
Right.
It means believe the. So I just feel that you and the Oracle of Delphi need to be in touch with each other, just because you were you could learn from each other, like for the Oracle. Then I also just think there are ways in which this could be like a human. I think the more that we can be embodied, and maybe it's because we have been in pandemic isolation for so long in a digital world, that to think of ways, and that's where what you're talking about with the physical. Now, some people are on the floor, some people are having the snacks and so on. But I just am thinking of human chessboards. There's just ways in which.
So I love these ideas. I think the
John, are you able to see the photos I'm sharing?
I'm not
Matt, how do I?
Yeah. So
John, stop sharing your screen for a moment.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, stop sharing. Then you tell us about these. We got 3 of your photos you sent to me. So there's the first one. You see it?
Right.
That is.
Hold on. Okay, I've stopped sharing. You can go ahead and show this. So yeah, this is. This picture is about 200 MIT sophomores just 2 weeks ago, doing the role play negotiation with me. As part of their welcome back to campus. And so they're at these roundtables representing the different delegations. And this is just the beginning. But then I don't know if Randy's got the pictures of everybody standing up and
do you see this next picture? You see the person choking?
Oh, yeah, the die-in? No, I don't see that. Right.
Shucks, what's going on here, Matt? What do I need to do?
You might need to stop sharing and reshare. Yeah, because we seem to be stuck on the first picture.
Okay, let's see what happens if I do this and boom, reshare. And there we go.
Share it again. And yeah, so what's happening here is the young woman on the left is playing the role of Rex Tillerson, the former Secretary of State and former CEO of ExxonMobil. And she has just been trying to give her speech to everybody about why they oppose a price on carbon, which is one of the policies that you liked here, Patty. And then what's happening, these 2 other people are staging. They're from the environmental group. They're Greta Thunberg and her group. And they came in and they staged a die-in right in front of Rex. And it was fantastic. This is the kind of stuff that happens. I mean, it was amazing. It was really wonderful. And I mean, I've seen senior business executives wearing their suit and tie give these incredible speeches about the need for social justice, and then staging a walkout with their delegation until everybody, compromises in their direction. It's really fun. You mentioned improv, Patty. That's what it is.
Right. Yeah.
People, and it's not just learning about climate and learning about science, although they do. They're also getting practice in enacting their improv skills, their public speaking skills, their negotiation.
Okay, John, on that note, can you tell us 1, 2, or 3 your favorite moments over the last 15 years of doing these simulations? 1 or 2 times that you really remember that people were just blown away.
Well, this kind of thing that you're seeing in the picture happens a lot. These demonstrations, walkouts. One other thing I remember very well, we had a bitter, difficult negotiation between, this was a few years ago, President Trump, which was one of our executive MBAs, and Xi Jinping. And both those roles were played by women that day. And they finally saw that they had to do something together or everybody was going to lose. And they demanded a written contract. So I grabbed a piece of paper, I wrote out a contract capturing their agreement, and I had them both sign it. And there was nowhere, and they were in the middle of the room. So I just leaned over and they signed it on my back. And that was a great moment. But a little more seriously, in one of these, very often people come up to me afterwards and say, this was fantastic. And I don't mean to toot our horn here. Remember, it's not my work, it's a team. But they say, how can I get more involved? And in a couple cases, I'll tell you one story. An engineer, military veteran engineer, came up to me after this session and he said, that was life-changing. How do I get more involved? And so we arranged for him and his wife to participate in a training we were doing. They learned how to run the workshop themselves, and then they took it out to their church multiple times and started to spread it in their communities. He then changed his career. He left the company he was in, which was a defense contractor, and he went into a career promoting sustainability as a full-time major career shift.
Who's the most prominent, like politicians or anybody like that you've run it with?
Well, so we've run it with nearly almost 40 senators, 200 members of the House now. I think about 7 or 8 governors. John Kerry has used it. The last time we did it with him was at MIT just before the lockdown, so February 2020. The Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo, has used it. Marty Walsh, Secretary of Labor, has used it.
Have you ever had any climate skeptics in the simulation?
Absolutely.
That have gone off on you and disagreed with and said it's a load of crap?
Yeah, this used to happen a lot, less and less. I mean, they're just, it's so obvious now. Really, 10 years ago, when I would just ask for a show of hands among our executives, how many of you think sustainability, climate change is a business issue? I wouldn't get more than a quarter. Today, it's 100%. But yeah, I have had deniers. They wouldn't call themselves deniers. They call themselves skeptics. But I have had that. And what I have learned, probably the hard way, is not to argue. Instead, what happens is the other people argue with them, the other people in the room. And that's incredibly important because you can't win the argument. You're not going to change those people's minds, and you run the risk of alienating everybody else. But people are more likely to pay attention when their respected peers, the other folks in the room with them, are responding rather than myself. This is, of course, an old trick in case study teaching, right? You're supposed to be Socratic and never give the answer, instead just ask another question. And of course, the dirty little secret about case study education, this is a little bit of a digression, but it's important. The Harvard method, Harvard Business School method for case study instruction is supposed to be Socratic. It's sold to the students that way. But if you read the teaching notes for the cases, they often include the plan for what the blackboard should look like at the end of the session. Well, you can't have it both ways. You can't kind of say, these are the things that the points that I'm going to be making by drawing them out from the students, and also claim that you're running a genuine Socratic process at the same time. The great thing about our simulation is it really is much closer to the genuine Socratic process. I don't tell people what to do. And you'll notice, and I really want to make sure before we end.
Yeah, we got about 10 minutes left. Keep going.
2.4 degrees. Anybody out there, Rod, Patty, Randy, anybody out there, give me an idea of what else we can do to get down to 2. We can't leave you without.
Okay. We got to wrap up a few last things here. Let's see. Can you see the slides? Are you able to see if God, I don't know what's going on here, but are you able to see this slide right here? Zoom share.
Versus having
Yeah.
Still the die-in.
Okay. This is so annoying. Let me reshare this again and share screen. And let's see if I got that there. Okay. Here, I want to just put this up here. This was a friend of mine wrote this as an ABT for your overall project. You able to read that?
Yep.
Yeah. So let me read it to you and you tell me, does this capture what you do? The climate crisis is real and incredibly complex, but policymakers often struggle to see the forest for the trees, focusing on point solutions instead of addressing the systems challenge. Therefore, we developed the En-ROADS model to help policymakers explore the broader set of choices, understand their implications, make better decisions on how to reverse stem the impact of climate change. Does that capture what you do, or is that missing some details?
Pretty great. Yeah, I like it. And yeah, it's all about creating opportunities.
For an outsider's detail on that I think's missing.
Yeah. Rod.
What struck me really strongly through this is that you may already do this. This is the first time I've seen this, really emphasizing the fact it's not the model, it's people's interactions as inspired by over the model that's critical here. And that to me is not in that message. And that to me has been clanging through everything you're saying. Because for the first hour, I was looking at it going, well, if I was playing with this, and how would I encourage other people to do it? But if you get Randy's room full of truck drivers from Omaha, etc., to do this together, that's a different story. And I think that's
have you done that? Have you done it with a totally non-academic crowd?
Oh, all the time. Sure.
And what's the difference there between people that have got graduate degrees?
Actually, it's a whole lot more fun with people who don't have graduate degrees. Because I'll tell you what.
Surprise!
Yeah, surprise. I'll tell you what happens, right? So, we've, and I have to say the politicians are a heck of a lot more fun to do it with than their staff. You get the PhDs or on their staff, the climate people. They're great people, but they are afraid to be wrong. This is one of the big problems in academia, right? And so I'll show them the beginning and I'll explain very minimally, here's how it works, here's what you need to do, and what would you like to try? And they say, well, before we do that, how have you modeled the shift between electric and liquid fuels? How have you modeled the load variation across the year and the day in the electric power system? And others, they ask all these technical questions that are perfectly good, legitimate questions, but the purpose of their asking them is not because they sincerely want to know, or at least it's not only that, it's because they don't want to have to make a decision and then see if it doesn't matter. They're afraid they'd be wrong. That's the wrong way to think about it. The right way to think about it is, I can try anything I want, whether I like it or not, whether I approve of it or not. Like Patty said, I don't really think nuclear is going to fly, but let's see what it would do. And then you'll learn what it would do and why. That is a lot harder to get to that interaction with academics. So I love it when we have the non-technical people, because they really want, the truck drivers in Omaha, I haven't done, but with people from working class backgrounds, people in schools, kids, they see what's happening in the world and they want to have a better world for themselves and their kids. One of the things we do at the end, and because I know you're going to run out of time here.
Yeah.
Let's just, and I know people aren't seeing it. Well, I can't show this again, but
We've got about 4 minutes left. Keep going.
Let's get to 2 degrees. So, we've got energy efficiency going. Now we've gotten rid of the coal. Let's electrify transport. Let's electrify buildings and industry. Now we're down to 2.1. Well, let's make the carbon price a little bit bigger, 2 degrees. And we've done it without any assumptions about technological magic, fusion power or somehow some magical technology like direct air capture to suck CO2 out of the air. We don't need that. Everything you've got here is stuff we can do pretty much today with what we know how to do today, or what we can grind out through the normal process of learning and scaling.
Okay, excellent. Well, speaking of non-technical audiences, let's let the Fool have the final comment or question here. Ms. Fool, have you got one last thing you want to offer, and then we're about out of time?
I guess I would just say that I lived up to my role because I let this thing, which is not a slide, but which certainly looked like a slide to me, I let that take me over. And I just thought, oh, yes, I've seen those bar graphs, or not bar graphs, those, whatever they're called, that kind of graph. I've seen that before, and it's very depressing, very static, and it predicts the future. And so first I was very thick-witted and not, which I'm supposed to be on the Fool. I was thick-witted and not getting that, oh, we're about to do stuff, and these things are going to be mobile and dynamic. I didn't really get that. I certainly didn't foresee all those people in the room. So I thought that I was to be sitting here, if I were going to be participating in this, I would be sitting by myself probably and just moving things around. So I think it wouldn't be the worst thing to start with the pictures of the people dying in front of Rex Tillerson or something that just, because for whatever reason, I thought, oh, this is so terrible. The color gray is so dominant and it's so alert, and it just it just reactivates. I guess what I'm saying is you come into this with us having seen graphs aplenty that are just not moving and moving in that all senses and dynamic. Yeah. I got miscued, and I did that to myself. I fully take responsibility for that. But I can kind of see why, starting with this, I thought, that's great. Gray is the color of despair, and all of my choices are gray.
Well, and I think things started to get interesting as soon as we realized this was an interactive. That's the whole name of this project is Climate Interactive. So, okay, we are out of time. And John, you got a final little thought for us. What's the future for this? You got some big events lined up with it?
Yeah, well, we're working hard on all levels, policymakers, business leaders, civil society leaders, and the public. We're going to need everybody. The big message from this, you did it here. You've created a much healthier, safer, and more prosperous world. Everything you did can be done right now today in the real world, but it ain't going to happen unless everybody gets up off their rear ends and gets active. So people have to take action personally, professionally, and politically. We can do it. There's no time to waste, but we can do it.
And what's your next big simulation event you've got scheduled?
Oh gosh. Well, I can't name the company, but the top 40 people in a global company with 600,000 employees.
There you go. All right. Excellent. And on that top secret note, whatever the company is, duly impressed. And thank you all very, very much. This was a fascinating little journey we went on there. And it started with a lot of chaos, but it started to take shape and get clearer as we got deeper into this. And I think by the end here, I think the three of us, your central audience here, I think kind of got it, what we're doing. So very, very cool. Dr. Fool, thank you so much for your participation. You were awesome and very valuable resource. Thanks, Rod. Enjoy your semi-lockdown down there. And John, I'll be back in touch sometime soon. Thank you very, very much for taking the time joining us. And everybody else, see you next week on the ABT Time podcast. Adios.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.